call this House to order. I now call upon thee to debate the resolution of this House believes that European anti-fascist movements before and during the Second World War were successful. I now call up the first speaker of side proposition.
So, as first speaker of side proposition, I would first like to state that this House believes European anti-fascist movements before and during the Second World War were successful. First, I'd like to define the term successful as having a moral impact and achieving their goals as a group. So we're first going to talk about the White Rose, who were a German anti-fascist group. And then I'll talk about the Arditi del Popolo. So the White Rose were successful in their quest to educate and spread awareness against the Nazis in a non-violent way. So they were university students at Munich University, and they saw firsthand the atrocities that were committed by the Nazis on the Eastern Front. And they, being like Christians, they thought, oh, this is actually messed up and we need to fight back. But instead of taking a violent front, they instead used their biggest tool, which was their intelligence and their education. So their goal was to, in a non-violent way, spread resistance and oppose the Nazi regime, which they accomplished. They wrote pamphlets and distributed them in secret. There was only about 7 members of the group, but their impact was furthered than that. They printed probably thousands of pamphlets. And also, their word was spread by the Allies after by airdropping these same pamphlets of anti-fascist, anti-Nazi propaganda onto German cities, where many more Germans would have seen this active resistance against the Nazis and would have been inspired. The resistance is not only about taking down the fascists, which is an extremely hard feat to accomplish because because the people don't have power against this ultra-violent, ultra-militaristic state. It's hard to form a militant group like the Italians did. But instead, spreading of ideas of anti-fascism is a lot more important for the cause. So this is why I'd argue that their moral impact was extremely successful, and that they achieved, personally, even though they were executed or imprisoned, they achieved their goal of educating and spreading awareness with what they had learned as university students, and that's why they were successful. So the Italians, the Arditi del Popolo, were on the opposite side of the scale. They were a militant group. Yeah, they were violent, but they were they had their own militant group, and they actually tried to assassinate Mussolini. Some of the leaders did, and it wasn't successful. This is the more direct attack against fascism. It's, as an ideology, it's extremely militaristic. So the way that they thought to fight back against it was with their own defense, their own military. And there were many fights between the Mussolini's fascists and the Arditi del Popolo. And a lot of them, the Arditi actually managed to win. There was one battle that was 20,000 fascist officers who were leading an offense against a city where there was 350 Arditi del Popolo, and they managed to hold the city and defeat the fascists 20,000 to 350, and they won. I'd say that's a pretty big victory, that's a pretty big success. Even though they were defeated in the end, they had many times where they managed to defend their people, where they managed to achieve their goal of fighting back. They might have not been the ones to kill Mussolini. Well, in the end, the people did kill Mussolini, but this is why the Italians, the Arditi del Popolo, and the White Rose, the Germans, were both extremely successful by their own standards as a group.
It is no doubt that these groups of resistance were extremely courageous, and they did outstanding things. Like the first speaker of side proposition mentioned, that the Arditi del Popolo did achieve so many amazing feats. The thing is, that's not enough. It is not enough to win a couple battles. You must win the war, which none of these groups did. This is the main argument of side opposition today, that we believe that these anti-fascist movements before and during the Second World War were not successful. We believe that they were not. We are not saying that they weren't important, but they weren't successful. To get into my first point, they did fail to achieve their core political goals. They, the White Roses, their whole goal was to shake the consciousness, to stop believing in the propaganda that the Nazis were spreading, but they wanted to do that in order to stop the Nazi regime. They wanted to stop the Nazi regime through getting people informed, through shaking consciousness, which they did to a point, but they did not achieve their full political goal, which was to stop the Nazi regime. Similarly, the Arditi del Popolo, they did try very hard. They did get a lot of victories in, but overall they failed. They won localized victories, but ultimately Mussolini was prime minister by 1922, and most of them were killed. Yes, they held firm on battlefield, but they died in the process. And after all, they tried their hardest, but their goal was to militarily defend and halt the spread of fascism violence on the streets, and to stop Mussolini from being in power, which none of them stopped. Mussolini still got into power. There were still thousands of people murdered and dead on the street through violence, through the spread of fascism. They helped a bit, but overall, Mussolini still managed to gain power, and ultimately, what stopped Mussolini was the war. Ultimately, he still became prime minister by 1992, and it was very courageous of them, for the Arditi del Popolo, they were courageous, but they did not achieve their core political goals. During this first speech of side proposition, she defined successfulness as moral impact and achieving their goals. You can make an argument on how they had a moral impact. You could. The thing is, you cannot make the statement that they all achieved 100% their goals, because they didn't. White Roses did not stop Nazi regime. The Arditi del Popolo did not stop the spread of fascism and violence. and did not stop Mussolini from getting the power. Overall, they tried, but they failed. And that failure is what stopped them from being successful. Successfulness cannot come from failure in this manner. They did not succeed. They failed. In addition to this, they also failed to spread their message. Yes, with the white roses, their point was to like spread the message throughout the world. But realistically, they didn't succeed. They're now, if you look back on time, they're just a bunch of courageous like uni students who tried to spread their message and ended up getting executed. Same thing with the Arditi del Popolo. It was a fierce group that ended up dying or getting arrested or both. They were courageous. Nobody's arguing that they weren't, but truly they failed.
Hey, scene change. So, as second speaker of side proposition, I'd like to first do some rebuttal of what the first speaker of side opposition said. So, first of all, in my first speech, I stated that the definition of successful would be to have a moral impact as a group and to also achieve their goals. Now, side opposition seems to think this means take down the Nazis. Our little group of, 10 university students, we expect them to destroy the millions of Nazi officers and people and the German government. That's quite a big ask. And that's also not the goal of the group. Their goal was to educate people. This is referring to the White Rose, of course. Their goal was to educate people as they're college students, university students. They don't have the military ability to take down the superpower of Nazi Germany. Throughout first opposition's speech, they seem to expect way too much from these anti-fascist groups. Being an anti-fascist, you're punching up, you're fighting against the big guy. And under this regime, it's so hard to exist as a group that isn't part of the fascist government. So for the Italians especially, it's way too much to expect them, or to call them unsuccessful because they didn't take down Mussolini immediately. Well, yeah, that was part of the goal of the Arditi del Popolo. Their goal was also just to fight back, to defend their people. Their name is literally the soldiers of the people. And that's what they achieved, I believe. It's a moral impact. These 2 points are sort of tied together, the moral impact and their goals, because as a resistance group, there's only so much that you can do. You're resisting. You're not, going on the offense here. You're not, going out and really, trying to defeat. Obviously, that's going to be, one of their goals. But most of the point was to resist, to go against this fascist group. Because if there's no one even trying to fight back, there's no hope for the people. And I think with both of these groups, while they're completely different, the White Rose and the Arditi del Popolo, they both did generate a moral impact. They impacted people that were, inspired by, pardon me, that were inspired by them, and the people that were defended by the Arditi. And I think that counts as a success. So for the White Rose especially, because they distributed pamphlets everywhere, well, it might not have been the biggest impact. It was a substantial effect that they had on other people. Anyone that would have read one of these pamphlets would have been influenced to absorb this anti-fascist propaganda, which in turn would have spread the ideology, which was their entire goal, was to educate and to spread awareness. In any case of fascism, the biggest impact that you can have within the people is to spread the knowledge of the movement. Knowledge is power, which is what the White Rose were doing. They didn't go out and kill Hitler themselves. It's like 5 university students. Their goal wasn't to end fascism. It was to impact the people. It was to go against it. It was to say this is wrong and this is why this is wrong. And I'm sure they knew that they were going to get in trouble. I'm sure they knew they could have been killed, and they were. But I think they still won a moral victory. As well as the Arditi del Popolo. It's a risk you take to defend your people against this evil fascist government. I'm sure they knew they would be captured and killed, but they fought a moral war against the ideology of fascism. And that's why they were successful, was the moral impact. And they did achieve their goal of fighting back. They won these small victories. It's too much to ask of a small militant group to defeat Mussolini solely. But they achieved their goal of ending Mussolini's reign post-mortemly, because Mussolini was taken down eventually. And because of people seeing this anti-fascist ideology spread and people fighting back, they were able to also join in, the Allies fighting back and the people's revolting against the fascist rulers. And it was partisans, it was people that ended up killing Mussolini in the end, which I think they were absolutely influenced by the RDT. So this is why both groups were actually, in turn, successful. Thank you.
As the second speaker of side opposition, the first thing I want to reiterate as the first thing in my speech is to reiterate the fact that side proposition stated the definition as a moral impact and achieving their goals. While this may be kind of vague, we still stand on the fact that they did not achieve all of their goals. Side proposition seems to paint the picture that both of the groups were too small to actually achieve anything that we are suggesting that they were aiming to do. But we on side opposition want to claim that this is evidence of their failure. They failed to spread. They failed to become less than just a small little group. They failed to become big enough to actually oppose their rivals of being the rivals of the fascist regimes. They failed to spread, and this is one of the biggest things you have to do to succeed as a Second World War anti-fascist movement. To become a successful movement, you have to spread. You have to become big. You can't just be remembered as a small group that is unexpected, that is completely weird and unexpected to be thought of to be able to oppose Hitler and Mussolini. It is imperative that if you have a movement, you have to grow. You have to become big enough to oppose whatever you want to oppose. And to build on the points of opposing, side opposition claims and demands that to oppose is inherently meaning to try to stop something. Opposing something has a reason. You can't just stand there and just like oppose them for no reason. You need to have a reason to oppose. And both of these movements did. Their reason to stand there, to try to shake the conscience, to try to get people informed, was in order to stop the Nazi regime. Sure, like it's like, oh, it's unexpected, like, oh, it's too much to expect from a small group to that they're gonna like fight against Hitler. But it should have been expected if they were properly like coordinated. They failed to grow. They at the end of the day, when we look back on history, they're just a courageous group of people who had the courage to stand up against against Hitler and his Nazi party, not a big movement that caused a lasting impact. This is one of the biggest things that we on side opposition stand on, that they didn't have a lasting big impact on our world. They did not form a big enough impact where they did leave a lasting mark of stopping like these fascist regimes. They are an anti-fascist movement. If they didn't stop fascism, which was their goal, their ultimate goal was to stop both of the groups both had the ultimate goal of stopping their fascist regime. Like to reiterate, like the Artiti de Populos, their group was an active military defense movement in order to stop fascist violence on their streets and to stop Mussolini. Side proposition is painting the image that we on side opposition are asking too much of them, when the Artiti de Populo's whole thing was that they were a military, a physical violent force to stop the spread of Mussolini specifically. They specifically wanted to halt the spread of fascist violence. It is hence why they would be unsuccessful because they failed to become big enough to actually stand a chance against their fascist counterparts. So like at the end of the day, they failed because they weren't able to grow enough to actually prevent anything meaningful, to have a lasting impact of standing against their fascist counterpart of Hitler and Mussolini and their backing cousins. At the end of the day, they are thought to be a courageous group, but that's nothing more. They are thought to be courageous people who had the courage to stand up against to stand up for their morals against a fascist regime. But that's all they were. They did not manage to stop anything. Sure, they might have had a moral impact, but that is so minuscule to the fact that they did not have a lasting impact of stopping any real life consequences that came about them being in a regime. And mostly, their impact was basically purely moral, which cannot be stated to be enough to quantify success. Success would have been to stop millions of people dying, which this is not, which they did not do. They were not successful. They were not fruitful. They may have had a moral impact, but they did not achieve their goals. Thank you. To conclude on side opposition's part of this debate, we on side opposition argued that the anti-fascist movements before and during the Second World War were unsuccessful because of multiple things, such as their failure to achieve their core political goals, like how side opposition claimed that the way to be successful is through achieving their goals and also having a moral impact. They did not achieve their core political goals, and also they failed to spread their message. They failed to become big enough of a movement to rival and to stop their fascist regimes, right? So at the end of the day, the Nazis and the National Fascist Party still rose to power. They still caused unfathomable amount of pain and suffering because they rose to power. These groups were courageous, they were inspirational, but at the end of the day, they did not succeed in stopping, in a meaningful, impactful way, their fascist regimes. They were not impactful enough to be considered successful. In schools, you learn about Hitler, you learn about Mussolini. You know who you don't learn about? You do not learn about the White Rose, and you do not learn about the Artiti de Popolo. Maybe if you are in the respective countries, you will learn about it, but here in Canada, you will not. Why? Because they were not successful, because they did not have enough impact. They're a cool case study, but they're not impactful, and they were not successful enough to be considered worthy enough for the education system to be teaching us here. Thank you for your time.
So, for the conclusion speech of side proposition, I'd first like to do some rebuttal before we get back into our points. Now, side opposition seems to be going over the same point over and over, that they didn't achieve their goals as a group, both Artiti del Popolo and the White Rose, because for the Artiti del Popolo, they didn't defeat Mussolini themselves, which this is true, obviously, but they were part of a movement, an anti-fascist movement, which, as the Allied soldiers were a part of, ended up defeating the fascists. The fascists didn't win in history. Italy's not a fascist country right now. It's the anti-fascists that ended up winning. It's a joint movement against Mussolini, which, as members of this movement, of this resistance, they absolutely contributed to the movement. So another thing is that side opposition seems to be misinterpreting the goals of these groups. Their goal was resistance. It was to fight back. It wasn't to defeat or stop. That's obviously what you want to achieve as a group. But the point is resistance, to fight back. Even if you don't win, fighting back means more than nothing. The point of a resistance group is not only to fight, but to also spread the word, spread the knowledge that this government is wrong and that we as people have power. And this is what the White Rose did in their movement. They might not have, shot Hitler, but they did manage to spread the word within their own circles at the university, as well as to other people, as well as the Allied forces knowing about them and thinking, yeah, this is a good enough pamphlet to want to airdrop all of this, anti-fascist propaganda onto the cities to, again, spread knowledge. This is why people care so much about propaganda, because knowledge is power, and it means so much. There's so much moral impact in, spreading the word, spreading the movement, as well as physically fighting back. But to conclude, I'd just like to say that success for an anti-fascist movement is not only by themselves as an isolated group defeating this giant superpower of a fascist entity. It's a whole movement that all of the Allied forces were a part of to let, good trump over evil. And both of these movements were a part of that. A part of the defeat of Mussolini and the defeat of Hitler is hope with the people of their countries that they dictated over. And both of these groups achieved their goals, as well as their moral impact, which is why I believe that these European anti-fascist movements were in fact successful. Thank you.
Thank you, speakers. After a long deliberation, I have come to a conclusion of whomst has won this debate. I have concluded that side proposition has taken home the trophy of this debate. Woo! Why? I shall tell you. Well, we believe, as the judge, that side proposition made very good arguments that side opposition did not rebuke about the moral truthfulness and moral successfulness of these movements. Especially with the White Rose movement, side opposition had very little to say about how they did not have a moral impact on the following event that transpired. This means that they did not address all of the criteria needed for successfulness that side proposition had suggested in their first debate. Following through, it is not that I say that side opposition fully failed. It is just that side proposition made further unrebuked claims. All speakers of this house did amazingly well, and just from the hair of my mustache did side proposition take home the medal. Thank you.